Hi, I'm Supriya, and today we're in conversation with renowned architect Vinod Kumar MM. He is the founder of DD Architects based in Thrissur. Vinod Kumar has worked on many conservation projects across Kerala, such as the Sakthan Thampuran Palace, the Vadakkum Temple, the Brahmaswam Madham, and so on. He firmly believes that the foremost duty of any architect is to respect the spirit of the place when trying to conserve it. Let's find out more about him. So, can you tell us a little about your background? Like, where did you grow up and what eventually led you to conservation architecture?
Okay. I was born in Malaysia. I was in as a kid. I was in Malaysia because my parents were there.
Okay.
And till fifth standard, I studied there. And originally, we are from Thrissur. So after that, parents shifted to Thrissur, and then I did my schooling here.
Okay.
Then after schooling, I was in Bangalore for architecture. Studied there, and then I did my training in Ahmedabad.
Okay.
And then went back to Malaysia for a brief period. Then came back to Thrissur in 2000, and from 2000 till date, that is 2021, I'm practicing out of Thrissur. In architecture, we have something called internship of 6 months. So personally, some of my friends and myself, we went to Ahmedabad, and I did my internship in a firm called Archi Crafts under a person called Mickey Desai.
Okay.
And by chance, he happened to be doing a Kerala temple at that point of time, where for an exhibition in Europe, we were preparing sheets to be exhibited, measure drawing sheets of Kottayam Kumaranellur temple. So 6 to 8 months, I was working on that particular project. So that was an introduction to Kerala for me from Ahmedabad. There is something called a thesis in architecture, for which I took Brahmaswam Madham in Thrissur. And that's a fabulous structure. Now we have also done a book on the Madam, a small handbook on the Madam. So for the thesis, where Sanjay Mohe, Bangalore architect, was the guide, connected with the thesis, did a lot of travels within Kerala. And after the thesis or after graduation also, for few years, I think the first 3-4 years when one wasn't so busy, one could travel a lot of Kerala, where one see a lot of Tarawads getting dismantled, places like Pumulimana and a lot of other interesting, important spaces. One could travel a lot of villages. So I think that travel is very important, and one could photograph. And in that whole process, one became close with ASI also, because one needed their sanction to enter to photograph a lot of these old spaces. So one became friends with ASI for these sanctions, and the first projects also came through ASI. So I think ASI also has played some important role in my life. And the starting of conservation projects happened through them. And that's where one got connected to a lot of our old heritage.
So, how would you define the difference between a restoration project, a conservation project, or even a revitalization project? How would you define that?
Maybe I would like to give an answer through some of the works we have done. Yeah, because now if you see Vadakkum temple, it's a pure conservation project, because we are trying to follow the same old style, the same old materials, lime, whatever which was used 500 years back or 1000 years back. We are trying to make it as close to it as possible in today's world. So that's purely a conservation project, where we don't want to use anything new, where a person going there should feel that it's being done, or we haven't touched the structure. It's as good as when it was built 500 or 1000 years back. So that's pure conservation. Even paintings, we do that. When a painting is getting conserved, we want it to be, we are just trying to protect the original, or we are trying to keep it as close to the original. But often what happens is, like some structures, like Vadakkechira, which we done, it was a whole old heritage pond in Thrissur, where in olden days people used to come there, take bath, like the Kolakkaravas were there, it was for the town. So at a point of time, it was in a bad shape, and it was not in use for a long time. So it became like almost like a dumping yard or a ground, and it's water. So when we did the project, the idea was to revitalize it. We want to bring in a new meaning to the space, because again, people don't go to ponds or for bath today. So we want to have a new meaning. So we thought the whole thing as a water edge park, where a person can go there, keeping all the sacredness there. You can go there, enjoy the evenings, near the water body. So then it's a revitalization of the space. Same is with Vanchikulam, a space which we are doing right now. It's a historic waterway of Thrissur, which connected Thrissur to Ernakulam or even Trivandrum, Kodungalur. That time it was all goods transport. Order, lime, all these things used to come through small Vanchi to Vanchikulam. So there was a historic connection which Thrissur town had to other parts of Kerala. But later, when with the train, with all the new modes of transport, lorry and all, that kind of water transport system got stopped. And the last 50 years, it's lying unused, filled again with all kind of weeds, and it's unusable. So we are trying to do that project where we try to give a new meaning to that same old space. Maybe today it's a tourism space where people can use it, tourists can use it. We can have small boats taking them, because you reach places like Chetua, Pulla, beautiful spaces within 7 or 8 kilometers from there. So I think that way we have to give new meanings to old spaces. Even in Europe, you've seen many spaces. You just keep the space same as it is. The uses would change. I think that has to happen everywhere, because otherwise you can't expect old Tarawads to survive the same way it is today, because the family systems, values, all Kutukudumbam, everything is stopped. So we have to find new meanings. Maybe we can convert it into a resort, we can make it into a homestay. We have to find new meanings to every old space. So I think that way finding new meanings is not wrong. It's just that it has to be appropriate meaning and it has to be conserved well.
What are the most common misconceptions that you've seen, like people have about these fields in architecture?
I think talking of misconceptions, I think the greatest issue which we often face is people have a certain feeling, okay, Parama, in Malayalam we call it Parama. Parama ennu parnal, it's something. Call it തെറ്റിദ്ധാരണ, and there's a certain misconception among most of the Malayalis, okay, a certain kind of old temple and all these things. And what happens is, like, very often it gets restored, or they try to portray something, building new, trying to copy that. I think that's the greatest issue which we often face. Okay, even I always believe the architecture has to denote the time, or it has to mark the time. Or even when you're building near an old structure, an old temple, it can be new. It's just that it needs to respect the space, it needs to respect the quality of the space, but it can be new. Architecture has to denote the time, it has to respect the time. So always I feel a lot of copying happens, or people come to us asking that, can we do an alligator in old style? I think that's often something which I don't do personally, because I feel if we are living in 2021, the architecture we built or we design has to be of 2021. We can't build something of 16th century today. So whether we are building a temple or any structure, it has to denote the time. When we are doing conservation, it's a different story, because we are adding something or we are conserving an old structure. But when we are building new, it has to always denote the time. So I think that's a certain idea about Parama or antiquity which we need to preserve. Otherwise it becomes like a fake antique. An antique is an antique. You can't fake an antique. So that is to be very clear. What is original, what is new, what is modern, what is traditional. I think these are ideas which needs a lot of education or awareness in the society, so that the whole design quality of the society also improves. I think that's very important.
What do you think is special about the architecture of Kerala?
Actually, Kerala is a very special place with respect to its location. The kind of monsoons we have Tulavarsham, Edavapadi, and that way I would say Kerala, the architecture is very unique. It's, again, if you see the climate has brought people here. It has brought Arabs, it has brought Chinese, it has brought Europeans. They've all come to Kerala much earlier than they've come to perhaps other parts of the country. So that's specific due to the location of the state and the kind of coastline we have. And that had an influence on the architecture also. I would say we haven't researched it enough. Many people say there is a connection between Japanese architecture, Chinese architecture and Kerala architecture. So that way it's a very interesting topic, and it's not researched enough.
Yeah.
Because the kind of roof forms, the
Yeah.
kind of materials used, you can see copper, a material used in temples. It has first come from Europe. And you can see the kind of roof forms we've used. And again, you mix that with a lot of things which have come from the north, like the courtyard houses or
Yeah.
many of these kind of things which we see in the architecture of Kerala. So it's something very unique, something which needs to be researched more. Now, if you see, for example, Japanese architecture, it's researched a lot and it's known all over the world. But sadly, Kerala architecture is not researched so much.
Yeah.
Still, we are losing a lot of buildings. So it's very important to preserve whatever we have remaining just for the study purpose.
So, do you have any favorite or like a structure that you admire a lot in Kerala?
It's not right to say that this structure is favorite. I think it can be personal choices.
Yeah, is
Now,
there
for
any?
me, I would say Vadakkunnathan is my favorite structure
Ah.
because I spent almost 15 years there from the start till today. Still, some work is happening. So you are in a constant contact with that space for the past 15 plus years.
Yes.
So that I would say that's my favorite structure. Also because that structure has helped me to understand Kerala architecture more, or the idea of the sacred architecture. When ancestors, when old people build something, whether they build a statue, whether they build a temple, whether they make a space or a well, it was done with a certain intention, it was done with a certain purity, and it was done with a certain clarity.
Yeah.
So that gets reflected in the structure. So that structure stays for long.
Yes.
So maybe 1,000-year-old structure is still there. You have 1,000-year-old structures across the globe, but today we build for 10 years, 20 years, 25 years. So I think that makes a big difference. So that kind of a clarity and intention behind a structure, I think, is very important, and that gets reflected, or that is seen even in the people who go to that space. People can feel it. So I think that's how we can differentiate sacred architecture from the not so. Olden days, every architecture was sacred. Even a house was sacred.
Yeah.
So I think today we have made divisions. So I think that way, in olden times, most of the architecture had this quality. Today we often don't have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you prepare for a conservation project? How do you decide that a structure is, worth rescuing? How do you do that?
It comes from experience. Now, when you see some structures, you feel, although it could be very dilapidated or not so great to look at because of the way it's been kept, but you feel, okay, this is something which is really worth restoring, or it can come back to its old glory. So one can get it from experience. And once you find that, okay, this is a fabulous structure, but by misfortune it's lying like this, then one has to do a lot of research. One has to figure out, one has to make drawings. So the first step is to do a bit of research on its history, where, when did it come up, or who built it, or what are the materials used. So in parallel to that, one tries to do a measure drawing, which is a detailed drawing of the structure, which is done by architects, architecture students, and they do a thorough measure drawing of the structure, which you make it into a plan. And these days you have AutoCAD. There are different kind of measure drawing instruments, LEDAR, all these things are there today. So you make a detailed drawing, and then from that drawing, plus the historical research and the material research that one does, one makes a report, which becomes a detailed report, and that becomes the master plan or the blueprint based on which the whole restoration efforts should be carried out. So in which we would figure out what material to use, which craftsman to contact, and how we can do the project. And again, one comes to an idea about the estimate or how the project can be done. So based on this whole study, which can take anything between 1 month to a year or more, the project is designed or finalized, and then one goes ahead with the tender and the other processes.
How important do you feel is research, before you start doing conservation, or before you take on a project? How important do you think is doing the right amount of research? Do you have any experience in that aspect? Do you share that with us?
Research is actually very important, and to have a clear idea or a clear picture on what has to be done, especially when you come to old structures, whether it's a temple or a church or a mosque, you have to have a clear picture what has to be done. So for that, you need a research into the kind of materials used, the kind of architecture that has gone into it. So recently we had done a book for INTACH, that's a guidelines for restoration of Kerala temples. We had also done a book on Brahmaswam Madham. So these books were done with the intention that it becomes a clear guideline. Okay, someone with money shouldn't just come to a structure, do a donation, and immediately someone comes and built up a structure. That often happens a lot in Kerala today, and where the people don't respect or don't understand how important the old structure was, or they don't know the value of the historic structure. So in the whole process, we are losing a lot of our history, very valuable history, which people abroad often restore or keep safe. In Kerala, although we have archaeological departments and all these things are there, but I would say the kind of structures we have is far more than what they can handle. Because every panchayat, every district has a lot of structures. And so it's a big task for all of us to understand them and to restore them. So for which we need proper guidelines, set of rules on how things could be done.
So can you tell us a little about the favorite projects, your favorite projects that you've worked on?
To start with, Sakthan Thampuran Heritage Gardens. That is one of the most important projects in our practice, because we started doing large-scale public projects with that project, because almost 3 years of, I would say it was 3 years of learning about the landscape of Kerala, the kind of plants, the kind of trees, because we had a research team, we had a sculptor team, and we had planted more than 400 plants in that 6-acre space. So from 2002 to 2005, we had worked with a whole lot of archaeological team, sculptural team, local craftsmen, plant experts, archaeology experts. So I feel that way the project was very important to us, where we started doing something very important in the public sphere. And after that, as a continuous project, Vadakkechira came, which was about, again, a public space, restoring, revitalizing a public space. As a continuity to that, Vanchikulam temple project came, and that is still continuing, I would say. Although it was over by 2016, still we are doing a bit of maintenance, or parts of it is still going on. And then we have projects connected to Guruvayur temple, Guruvayur Kutambalam, and still some projects are going on in Guruvayur. That's very important for us. And we have done 2 dance studios, one for Methil Devika and one for this teacher called Sankita Rajesh in Ernakulam. And again, we've done some small space for Nadana Kairili. So all these are important projects for us. And we have done few residences, 4 to 5 residences, which are very close to us. And again, as a government project, Ram Nilayam was a very important project, because it's done purely within the government setup infrastructure. But we are very happy with the project.
So do you have anything in store for the future projects?
Right now we also work a lot with INTACH Thrissur. I'm also the convener of INTACH Thrissur at the moment, and also the chairman of Indian Institute of Architects Thrissur right now. So with INTACH, we try to do a lot of restoration and conservation or documentation projects, because we feel it's something very important. So we are trying to do something called Tekungad Maidan, like the important central space in Thrissur. We have done a tree mapping through INTACH already, and we are trying to do a proposal. So these are all very important projects where it's so important for the town. So I think these projects are there, and even we are doing something, some residences, interesting residences are coming up. We are doing something in one Agraharam in Palakkad, and some other interesting projects, residences are coming up. So I think there is lots in store. We are doing some projects in Guruvayur. So all these are in store. I would also like to say that I don't plan anything. Right from the first project till today. Now Sakthan Palace came to us without any planning. Just started doing it. Vanchikulam temple came to us without any planning. Office that we will convert this small shed behind the house into a full-fledged office came to us without any planning. So there's no plans as such. Whatever, I don't plan for the next day. Whatever comes in store for us, or whatever is meant to be done by us, I believe it will come to us.
So do you have any philosophies or beliefs that you have developed over the years, especially related to conservation architecture?
Okay, I think when you talk of philosophy, I believe conservation is all about restoring or keeping the spirit of a space. Now, whenever you go to an old site, whether it's an old palace or a temple or a building, I think there would be certain intentions with which the original builders or the master craftsmen would have built it. So I think it's a duty of an architect or the person who is doing the project to understand or try to discover the original feel or the spirit of the space. And if one can do justice to it, I think finally the projects become good. And I think that's very important, especially when you talk of sacred spaces, whether it's an old cow or a temple or a church. When one can discover or understand the spirit of the space, I think one can then understand, okay, what is the right material to build with or how to do it. What did the original craftsman think while doing the space? So I think that understanding the spirit is very important. And so while doing conservation projects, many times we learn from the project or we understand from the project. It helps you understand the idea of a space. Or when you go to an old temple, when you go to Vanchikulam, then you understand what is Indian philosophy or what do Indian culture mean. I think because it's so much evident there, it's very difficult to explain or express it in words, but it's somewhere there in those old spaces. So that way, I think understanding the spirit of the space becomes the greatest thing that one has to do or one has to try and understand. And I think it's all about listening to the space, and that also needs a lot of training, or it doesn't come just like that. One needs to see or one needs to listen to the voices there. Then often one gets what's there, sometimes one do not get. So I think that's always trying to listen to the voices within the spaces there. I think that's the whole challenge. If one is successful in that, then yes, one can do a successful project. If one could not get it, then maybe the project doesn't become the way you wanted it to be.